Good afternoon again, everyone. It's an honor to be back with you. Although I want some of what Chris had in his coffee because he's all pepped up. I'm only halfway through my 20-ounce Coke because you know how you hit that afternoon lull there. It's like, ooh, heavens. So actually, I would like to make this more conversational because I really don't want to just talk at you for 15 or 20 minutes. So if anything pops into your head or if you have a question, just raise your hand to break it up. That would be great. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Cincinnati, which is a great little, it's a river city, lots of amenities, but you know, we kind of haven't shaken our reputation before kind of being out of the mainstream. In fact, you know, there's that old adage out there about Mark Twain, and they allege he said he wanted to be in Cincinnati when he died because everything there happens 20 years later than every place else. But I hate to say, when it comes to the educational landscape, I think we're in it with all of you. And earlier I had thrown up this slide. You know, how many of you started out with the Common Core standards and now you're not allowed to say the words and they're called something else? Raise your hands. Yeah, that's what happened with us. Now there are new learning standards, but not the Common Core. We're not allowed to say the words. Then our state joined a consortium park, but then after a year got rid of that. Now we're on to AIR, and you know, we have no trend data now, which is unfortunate. And in the end, the only thing our parents really understand is the test scores just seem to keep going down, which isn't good news for any of our districts. That's just a huge issue. You know, charter and voucher schools are being put out there as the panacea instead of traditional schools, really without any evidence to support that. But I hate to tell you, we're a part of the if you can't beat them, join them. And our district sponsors 2 charter schools, you know, to stay competitive. Then, you know, we got excited when Congress and with ESSA promised more local control. But it appears that the states view local control as state control as opposed to local school boards. Because our state's doing the opposite of the less is more. They weren't happy with the 17 annual tests mandated by the feds. We're up at 24 in our state. So less is more has gone out the window. And it looks like we're in for a rocky road ahead with the new presidential administration's education policy. So I think we're all just ready to fasten our seatbelts and see what's going to happen. So that's why I had mentioned earlier, it was just, you know, I think it's important for all of our districts to take control, really work with your local partners to feel your way through this. You need to get in, if you have been engaging, you need to re-engage the partnerships with the local community and really listen to what they're saying to you in this time of chaos. I had talked a little bit earlier about the lessons from our community learning centers, and these are 2 of our new buildings that house those centers. And the next slide shows you some of what is in them, which really has made a difference. Now, when our community learning centers first started, we did have a beyond the school hours component with 21st century grants, but they too have been whittled down and we know are going away. So we're trying to look at replacement funding for that. Now, with our CLCs, since I just briefly mentioned them earlier, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the health clinics are staffed by nurse practitioners and pediatricians from the local hospitals. We could never afford those kinds of staff in our schools, but this is why we were so nervous when they were talking about the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. These hospitals, of course, have a business plan. They can't do this for free, so they do bill private insurance and Medicaid. And, you know, this is a kind of situation that there has to be something for everyone. So that's why they're willing to put the staffs in our schools so students don't have to be pulled out, miss school. But on the other hand, they do have to bill for their services. So we were very thankful that the ACA is still there and Medicaid expansion is still there. Now, any questions about that? I mean, it's something you may want to consider in your districts. I was surprised about how interested the hospitals were in partnering with schools, because I think there is a community mandate if the Affordable Care Act still continues, where they have to do community outreach, and in their minds, the perfect place for a hospital to do community outreach, it's where the children are. And they're also looking at it, expanding it to staff and the parents of the children. Okay, you know, when we were, I don't know about your report card, but our report card in our state is 16 pages long, and it has a 32-page guide to explain it. And that really leaves everyone scratching their heads. So I stole this idea from our suburban districts. In fact, this was this really brought us all together. About 40 districts in the southwestern part of Ohio have come together, and they said, look, the report card focuses on, it's a picture of all our failures. Why don't we put together a quality profile that's a picture of the successes in your district? So the two pictures you see, it's the report that we put out to say, yes, here's our state report card, and yes, we need to improve the test scores, but here's our quality profile, and here's the good things that are happening in our district to kind of counterbalance that negative narrative. What our stakeholders said. As I mentioned earlier, our parents aren't interested in text prep. You know, they want the art, the music, the social emotional learning, peer leadership opportunities. They want that for their children and not just testing. But I want to tell you a little story. I flew in yesterday afternoon, because I've learned you never want to be on the last plane flying anywhere. So, got in here early and said, ooh, let me walk around DC a little bit, because I think those of you who live here forget about how truly magnificent it is here, and how those of us who only get to visit occasionally try to hit everything when we're here. So I was over at the National Gallery, and I'm walking up all the steps. And as I kind of had to take a little break before I got all the way to the top, I see a yellow bus pull up in front, and I think it said Fairfax County Schools, and the doors open and students get out on a field trip. Now, it's March 30th. Does anyone know what the first thing that popped into my head was? And I'm embarrassed to admit it. Come on, all you school administrators, you know exactly what I thought. Bingo. What the heck are they doing on a field trip on March 30th? Hasn't their state test started yet? Or they're probably ready to start in a week. And then I just said to myself, oh my gosh, look what's happened to me. I had those thoughts. So you can see why. Oh, well, you skipped the slide. On the next slide, where parents aren't that interested in test results because they know that something has happened that has changed what happens in schools, and they are not happy. Okay. On this page, these pictures of our fabulous graduates, we turned these into you know those billboards, 20 feet wide? We said, oh my goodness, we need to celebrate our students' achievements. We need to shout that out to the community. So when the political season's over and all those nasty billboards from the politicians come down, and you know, it's not that expensive, we put up fabulous billboards with our beautiful children on it saying, look at our accomplishments. Inexpensive, very effective, and that should be celebrated. And you notice it's not all college, some of it apprenticeships parents are interested in. These days it's a different climate than just college. They want military, like I said, a career path and college. They want options. Now, this is one that surprised us. We, in Ohio, you have to vote on levies. So we tried back in, I think it was 2010-11, a levy for more teachers, technology, and transportation. And our stakeholders did not buy it, and we did not get new money. But suddenly, when we surveyed them now, there was just a whole shift in their thinking. The technology isn't a frill anymore. The community knew that in order to bridge that digital divide, where a lot of our families, they don't have computers at home, they don't have internet access at home, and the state's now mandating online testing, we had to invest in technology. So they understood that and said, check, you need to do that. Also, the whole child. They want us to educate the whole child, as I mentioned earlier. Very important. They don't want you cutting out any music and art programs in our schools, which a lot, I think, of districts, the first thing you do when you run out of money, that's what schools do. This was a really interesting one that actually caught us by surprise. In our district, we've offered preschool for, gosh, probably a quarter of a century, because we had Head Start dollars, and also the state funds a little bit of preschool. However, it was for maybe fewer than 1,000 students. And when you think about it, we have 3,000 children who start kindergarten, and then another 3,000 3-year-olds. So really, out of that universe of 6,000 students, we were only hitting 1,000. And a group of really sharp young millennials came up as part of Leadership Cincinnati and said, we should have universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds. And of course, we said, that's a great idea, but there's no money for it. But you know, they're young and idealistic, haven't been ground down yet. So they said, we're gonna raise the money. Well, that caused us some angst too, because since we had failed the levy back in 2010-11, it was now 2016, it had been 8 years, and we were out of money. And they were talking about doing an earnings tax, and when we pulled an earnings tax plus a property tax levy that we were gonna put on the ballot, it showed that both initiatives would probably fail. So we were in a conundrum about what to do. But again, I say, these young millennials said, by golly, we're going to do this. So it did take us months and months and months of negotiation, but, sorry, I'm out of order, it's late in the day. Okay, there we go. It was months of hard conversation and compromise, where business came together. Well, they didn't want the earnings tax. The unions wanted the property taxes because that's how we're funded. Faith-based groups came together and said it's the right thing to do. And we ended up passing a property tax levy to offer universal preschool for 4-year-olds. We couldn't afford 3-year-olds. Hopefully, that's for the future. But there were compromises. Not only will this levy fund our preschools and our schools, it's going to fund preschool for parents who choose community providers. And there's lots of small providers, especially in the African American community. And the faith-based groups wanted us to make sure that they got some of the money and weren't put out of business. So again, it was a compromise. And actually, we're a little bit ahead of state law, because I know our lawyer is really nervous because there's a ton of revised code in the state about how money flows for K-12 education, but now this is pre-K-12, and state law is silent about it, but our business people, you know, they came to the rescue and said they'll send their lobbyist to the state capitol to help us get changes in state law. So we're very fortunate that way, because we're kind of on, this is definitely new territory. And I was pleased to announce that It passed with 62% of the vote, and our district had not that kind of percentage since Eisenhower was president. So that was pretty incredible. So I guess we could flip back a few slides to some of our Vision 2020 improving neighborhood schools. You know, that does cost, school improvement costs money, and that's part of the issue. As we work to improve our neighborhood schools, they have to have marketing materials. You need to be able to tell parents, here's all the wonderful things we're doing in your neighborhood school. And we allowed the communities to pick. For Hayes Porter wanted high tech. Several chose arts and culture. We have some that have environmental science. And that was pictures of last year's group. There's another set this year. So of course, my chief academic officer and the curriculum people, we're meeting with all the school communities as they talk about what they wanted. And it was interesting. This year, one of the schools chose dance and movement. Well, I can tell you it caused heart palpitations with the curriculum folks, as you can imagine. But, you know, we had to say, wait a minute. It's what the community chose. I am sure we can find links to the curriculum. We cannot go back out there and say, you can't do that, because you are breaking that bond with the community. So sometimes you just, you always don't get what you want, but we were careful not to go back out and tell them no, that it wasn't rigorous enough. So let's see where we are. Things are on the upswing, although, like I said, you would never see this on our state report card, but we're gaining enrollment. We had been one of those, like most urban districts, declining enrollment, losing funding, which further accelerates cuts, which further causes people to leave. So we are on the upswing. The neighborhood schools, where we've put the specialized programming in, increasing. Our graduation rate's up, still nothing to write home about, but it's getting better. We're making sure that our students that there's advanced placement AP classes in all our high schools, not in just the 1 or 2 college prep high schools. And our ACT score has come up. Again, I say, we're still working on it. That's certainly not good enough, but it is getting better. And we are now working on our second round of Vision 2020 schools. We keep listening to our stakeholders. They wanted, earlier today when we were, one of the leaders to learn from, when she was talking about the gifted programming and making it more diverse, we're starting a school for gifted and exceptional students to bring in that diversity, because parents wanted that. We're also offering a Spanish language and culture school. So we're just mindful of our need to keep listening to our stakeholders, let them tell us their priorities for their schools so that we all can be successful together. So I am going to stop there, and if there's any questions, comments, conversation. Thank you. Mike has the mic, okay.
You talk a lot about programs in your urban area of Ohio. How has the initiatives went down to your rural communities? Because like you were talking about embracing partnerships and embracing your community, you have the luxury of having lots of business and industry in your community, where in my fact, we have nothing.
No, you're right, and the answer to your question is, in general, no, we don't partner, but during adversity, there is it's called CORS, Coalition of Rural and Appalachian Schools. And I'm part of the Urban 8. But as we were dealing with our state legislators, we figured out, And actually, Ohio is more rural than it is urban, so there's more rural Republican legislators than there are urban. So we have reached out to the chorus group. In fact, I drove out to Logan County, ate at the Little Dutchman, and we figured out we do have things in common. Transportation was an issue. For us, it was an issue because I have to transport all the private and charter school students, which costs millions a year. It's an issue for your rural districts because they're so large, the bus is running all over the place. So we said, okay, let's get together, both of us lobby at our state capitol around transportation issues. Lack of funding for special education, another area we both are suffering. So we are trying to reach out and coordinate with our rural counterparts, because quite honestly, they're poorer than we are. But they have a bigger voice in our state capitol than the urbans do. So it's really out of self-preservation.
We too have been exploring the idea of extending preschool. Talk a little bit more about how, I'm intrigued by how you partnered with the local faith community, because that was one of the roadblocks we're running into, is we didn't want to decimate their programs.
Exactly. That's why the money will follow the child. It's almost like in Ohio, there's vouchers for the parochial schools where you get, I think it's $4,500 to go to a K-12 parochial school. We were thinking along those lines, the money would follow the child either to our school or a private provider, a small provider. But there's even another little interesting twist. The faith-based community also wanted to make sure that we were paying, that those small providers were paying a living wage. Because part of the problem about quality in your preschools, when you're paying someone $8 an hour, they don't stay. So those private preschools have constant turnover. So they also want part of that money to make sure that $15 an hour is being paid to the preschool. You know, they're not teachers, they're instructors. They could, you know, have a high school diploma, and that's all, to make sure that they stay. And some of the money also goes for professional development of that instructor to stabilize and increase the quality in those small providers. And the faith-based community really pushed for that. New, novel, and we are still trying to put those pieces together as this all rolls out in August. And also just to figure out, it's for it's free tuition under 200% of poverty. How we're going to figure out how much each family gets, all of that, we are just working night and day to try to make it work correctly, you know, without any miscues.
Mary, I hope I'm not stepping out of line by letting folks know that you're going to be leaving your position soon. You're retiring after an amazing career in Cincinnati. And I wondered if you just might talk a little bit about sort of the succession and the sustainment of the major strides that you've made, that you've just walked us through. How is this work going to go forward? You know, that does, I think, worry everyone, just because I am actually from Cincinnati, so I'm unusual. I'm an urban superintendent, but I came up through the ranks. And normally urban superintendents whip in and whip out every 3 years, and that's pretty much what happened until 9 years ago. After 2 failed searches, I ended up getting the job and have been there for 9 years. That is a concern because people always tend to bring whatever worked across the country to the new position. But I can tell you there's been enough with the preschool piece, enough buy-in in the community that I don't feel that any new superintendent's going to be able to come in and blow up the commitment to preschool. And also the community learning centers, our board is extremely invested in that. And it's part of the fabric now
of who we are. So I know those two things will survive. You know, they might, you know, the Vision 2020, My Tomorrow, they might change the name on that. But the big ones, the community learning centers, the commitment to preschool, I truly feel those will stay, and I'm not worried about that because of all the board and community buy-in. So I think right now, because I know it's so late, thank you all so very much.